This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Hello, Rabbi Sonnenschein, Rabbi Garfinkel. Thank Rabbi Nissenbaum for bringing me here for the Shabbos of Chizuk. And shkoyach to my good friend Mordechai Zimberg for bringing me here as well. Just to share a thought on B'nagea, these Parshas. The Gemara tells us from Psachim on Daf Chaf Beis that there was somebody by the name of Shimon Hamsuni who specialized in darshaning all the Essen in the Torah. That was his specialty. It's a lot of Essen in the Torah. I think since then there's actually a Sefer being doirish all the Essen in the Torah. And he was very successful in these drashas until he got up to the pasuk As Hashem Leikecha Tira. And he says to himself, who else are you supposed to fear other than the Ribbon Shalom? And basically he said, must be I made a mistake. Must be, who else is there that's on par with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? You have to fear like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's even tafel to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he said, must be that S is not significant. And basically he took all, that sefer, all the Essen in the Torah, Rosh Hashanah, he had that. And he was going as it. He says, every share I ever gave was wrong. Sheker b'chazav. Now, which Maggid shir would ever do that? I'm sure Rav Shimon Hamsuni had thousands of the chukim he could have come up with of who es Hashem HaKacha Bala rabbis. And he could have said, Vayechi Yashev. He could have put by that one, Vayechi Yashev, and call it a day. But his midas ha'emes was such that if he can't find a good pshat for this, then must be it's not a correct mahalach. Ad shabar Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva came, v'darash es Hashem lekecha tira, l'rabbis talmidei chachamim. So the question is, apparently nobody else figured out that you have to fear Talmid Chacham like the Rebbi Shalom. Not Rav Gamliel, not Rav Tarfai, not Rav Meir. None of the Tanoim could figure this out. Only Rabbi Akiva. So why only Rabbi Akiva? Why was Rabbi Akiva the only one who knew the chashivas of Talmidei Chachamim? So there's a Drashas Chasam Sofer. Drashas Chasam Sofer says we know Rabbi Akiva was the Gilgal of Yosef, and that's why in Shas he's called Akiva ben Yosef. Why is he called Akiva ben Yosef? His father's name's not Yosef. It means he's a Gilgal of Yosef. And when Yosef met Yaakov Avinu was saying Shema. Why wasn't Yosef saying Shema? The big kasha. Why wasn't Yosef saying Shema? So Yosef wasn't saying Shema because even though Yaakov said Shema, even though Yosef was a melech, but Kavod HaMelech doesn't supersede Shema. But Yosef couldn't say Shema because Kavod Talmidei Chachamim is even greater than Kavod HaMelech. Why? Why is Kavod Talmidei Chachamim even greater than Kavod HaMelech? Because Hushva Kavod Talmidei Chachamim le Kavod HaShchina. So since Rabbi Akiva is the Gilgal of Yosef, and Yosef taught the world the chashivas of Kavod Talmidei Chachamim, that's why Rabbi Akiva knew that drasha. That's Chasam Sofer. Rabbi Yosef Engel says, a wondrous pshat, Rabbi Yosef Engel says, based on the Baal Shem, that the Rebbi Shalom is noikeim different than a regular melech. When a regular melech takes revenge, so the melech comes and he hangs the guy, and the guy learns his lesson. But the Rebbi Shalom doesn't do that. The way the Rebbi Shalom operates is Kel Nekamois Hashem, Kel Nekamois Hoifia. By the way, the Arizal says that when Reuven came to the bar, he said, Va'ani ana ani ba, Va'ani ana is Rashi Tevois, Kel Nekamois Hashem, Kel Nekamois Hoifia. Why? That different discussion. But anyway, so the Baal Shem gives a mashal. He says that you have a king, somebody insulted the king, so what does the king do? The king invites the guy, he promotes the guy, he becomes an officer, then he becomes Mishnah Lamelech, and the guy is going through the palace, and he sees the majesty of the king, the kavod of the king, the greatness of the king, and the guy feels really rotten about what he did. He feels that he shouldn't have insulted the king. The king is so kind, the king is so just, the king has so much wisdom, he's so magnanimous, and he feels rotten about what he did, and that's the way a great king takes revenge. Same thing with the Rebbi Shalom. When someone does an Avera, says the Baal Shem, the way Hashem is noikem is that Hashem gives that person an extra degree of sensitivity to that inyan, so he should really feel bad about what he did. And then that's the way the Rebbi Shalom is noikem from the person. So says Rabbi Yosef Engel. We know Rabbi Akiva, when he started off his career, he did not have proper chashivas for Tamei Chachamim. He said, Mi yitneni Talmid Chacham v'anashchenu kechamar. Rabbi Akiva basically wanted to bite off the head of Tamei Chachamim. The Chassam Sofer asks, but he was such a big Baal Midas. Chassam Sofer brings rayas to Rabbi Akiva, even before he became Talmid, he was a tremendous Baal Midas. So why did he hate Talmidei Chachamim so much? So he said, because a person could be a great Baal Midas, but if they don't learn Torah, they will hate Talmidei Chachamim. That's just the reality. So Rabbi Akiva in the beginning didn't have chashivas for Talmidei Chachamim. So how is Hashem noikem? Hashem gave Rabbi Akiva more of a sensitivity toward kavod Talmidei Chachamim more than anybody else. Mamela, everybody else, when they saw the pasuk of Hashem lekachatira, they said, could it be that the kavod of a Talmid Chacham is equal to the Shechina? So nobody else could be doiresh as Hashem lekachatira l'rabbis Talmid Chachamim. But Rabbi Akiva, who understood the greatness of Talmid Chacham more than anyone else. Why? Because Hashem gifted him with that level of perception. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva had a weakness in that area. Rabbi Akiva was able to be doiresh as Hashem lekachatira l'rabbis Talmid Chacham. That's Rabbi Yosef Engel. But I think the simple pshat and why Rabbi Akiva was able to be doiresh as Hashem lekachatira l'rabbis Talmid Chachamim is, Rabbeinu Yonah tells us that part of the tshuva process is to correct the precise area where a person has a failing. So if a person is, let's say, not careful in Hilchos Lashon Hara, then the proper way to do tshuva is to exert extra chizuk in the area of Inyanei Lashon Hara. And if a person has a weakness in a particular area, the correct way to do tshuva is to address precisely that area and to mechazik yourself in that area. So I think we could say simply, the reason why Rabbi Akiva was doiresh, as Hashem lekachatira l'rabbis Talmid Chachamim, is because he was nichshal in kavod Talmid Chachamim. As part of Rabbi Akiva's tshuva process, Rabbi Akiva worked on the inyan of chashivos for Talmid Chachamim more than anybody else. Rav Gamliel, Rav Tarfain, they always had a certain chashivas for Talmid Chacham, so they didn't have to be oived in that area. But Rabbi Akiva, who started out not appreciating Talmid Chachamim, as part of his tshuva process, he was mechazik in that inyan more than anybody else. So he was able to be elevated in that inyan more than anybody else. And therefore he was able to be doiresh, as Hashem lekachatira l'rabbis Talmid Chachamim. Meaning everybody else sort of started off with a healthy measure, a healthy dose of kavod Talmid Chachamim. So they looked at the pasuk as Hashem lekachatira, and they never really elevated themselves to the madrega of recognizing the chashivas of Talmid Chacham the way Rabbi Akiva did, because Rabbi Akiva had to work on that inyan more than anybody else. So let's see for a moment how high Rabbi Akiva was able to be elevated in that inyan of kavod Talmid Chachamim. We know that the Asara Harugei Malchus were mechaper for the Mechiras Yosef. And the question that all the Rishonim asked, Rabbeinu Bechaye asked in Parshas Vayechi, that there are only 9 Shvatim involved in the Mechiras Yosef. You have, Ruvain wasn't there. You have Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. Yosef obviously not, even though Rabbeinu Bechaye in one answer he says Yosef, it was his fault. He incited the whole thing. Binyamin wasn't there, so you only have 9. So who's the 10th that needs kapara al yedei asa harugei malchus? So Rav Shamshin Me'ashtropoli, at the very last piece in Likutei Shoshanim, says the last individual who needs a kapara was the Shechina itself. As we know, they brought the Shechina, they got the Shechina to be mishtatef in the Mechiras Yosef, and the Shechina was part of the Cherem, and therefore the Shechina was the 10th entity part of Mechiras Yosef. So now there were 10 Harugei Malchus. Who's keneged the Shechina? Says Rav Shamshin as well, Rabbi Akiva is keneged the Shechina. Why is Rabbi Akiva keneged the Shechina? Because Rabbi Akiva was doiresh, As Hashem Elokecha Tira, l'Rabbi's Tamid Chacham, Rabbi Akiva equated Kavod Tamid Chachamim to the Shechina, so only Rabbi Akiva could be equal to the Shechina. The Shlas says, Rabbi Akiva came literally Tachas Kanfei Shechina, he became a ger, but Tachas could mean Tachas the Shechina. He was in lieu, in place of the Shechina. Amazing on the Gemara that Rabbi Akiva, and that's why Rabbi Akiva died. Echad, be'echad. Be'echad means because he took the place of the Echad HaMiyuchad of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In fact, the Ion Yaakov on that Gemara, Ion Yaakov learns, a Peladik Ion Yaakov, and he says this again in Masechta Sanhedrin. The Ion Yaakov says, Rabbi Akiva was choytei in darshaning l'Rabbi Tamid Chachamim. How could you say? He went too far. Rabbi Akiva went too far, the Ion Yaakov says. And the reason why he was punished and he took the place of the Shechina is because he went over the limit. He made Tamid Chachamim mamish like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Therefore, he was punished that he was killed because of that drasha, the Ion Yaakov says. Ad kedei kach, the Ion Yaakov in Masechta Sanhedrin says that Reish Lakish said HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed Adam Harishain Dar v'dorshav, dar manhigav, and Adam saw Rabbi Akiva. Samach b'toirasai, v'ne'etzav b'misasai. Says the Ion Yaakov. Samach b'toirasai. You know why Adam loved Rabbi Akiva's Torah? Because Adam made from the Eitz Hadas because he wanted to be Keloi Kim. So whose Torah allows the Talmud Chacham to be Keloi Kim? Rabbi Akiva's Torah. That's why he was Samach b'toirasai. But v'netzav b'misasai, because he realized Rabbi Akiva Taka died because of that drasha. But the Achronim ask on the Ion Yaakov, Chas v'shalom, that Rabbi Akiva made a mistake with that drasha. Stam, we paskin l'halacha, Gemara in Shavuos, Daf Lamed, we paskin l'halacha, that kavod tamid chachamim is hushva l'kavod hamakar. But Pashut Pshat, of course, Rabbi Akiva was correct. But nobody was able to reach the madrega of hakara, of the kavod of Tamid Chachamim, because nobody, l'chayra, worked as much on that inyan as Rabbi Akiva. So, to me, I think we learn from here a very great yesod. And that is, sometimes a person has a nisayon in a particular inyan, whatever that inyan may be. But the fact that a person has a nisayon in that inyan means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is affording the person the opportunity that obviously a person has to work specifically on that inyan. And if a person does work on that inyan, they could reach a higher madrega in that inyan than anybody else. So sometimes we, it's not, he has such an easy time learning. I have a much harder time. It's not right, it's not fair. No, just the opposite. That person should say, it's not fair. I don't have such a hard time, so I could never reach the madrega that you could reach because you're going to have to work on it, and when you work on it, you'll be elevated to a much higher level. Think about what happened to Rabbi Akiva. None of the other Tanoim could ever, it wasn't Ola al Daitam to say Lamaisa, the kavod of Tamid Chacham was Hushva l'kavod hamakam. Only Rabbi Akiva. Why only Rabbi Akiva? We're suggesting because he had to put in more amelus in this inyan, and once he did, he was propelled to the highest level of hakara, of the importance of, and the chashivas of Tamid Chachamim, ad kedei kach, that of all the Tanoim, who could have been tachas kamfei ashchina? Only Rabbi Akiva, who is doiresh, as Hashem lekecha tira, l'rabbis, Tamidei Chachamim. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. That's what I got for you today. Bracha v'atzlacha, Agun Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.